Hello and welcome to another episode of Earth911's Sustainability in Your Ear. I'm Mitch Ratcliffe, your host, and it is World Water Day, and we want to take a look at water recycling technology. Now, that's mostly been used in industrial settings to capture and clean water so that it can be reused or put back into the environment. But it's increasingly also being used to augment local drinking water supplies. So let's run down a little of the background information about water. Only about 3% of the world's water is freshwater, and more than 2/3 of that is locked up in glaciers that are at the poles. According to the World Wildlife Fund, 1.1 billion people worldwide lack access to water, and a total of 2.7 billion people find water scarce for at least 1 month of the year. Recently, Chennai in India, a water-rich city, literally ran out of water for almost a month during its summer. Additionally, the Centers for Disease Control point out that in high-income countries, 59% of fresh water is used in industry, but in low-income countries, it's only 8%. So those emerging economies are going to face increasing water scarcity as they build their economies. The World Bank also predicts a decline in economic growth of almost 6% of the global GDP by 2050 as competition for water intensifies across all sectors. So what are we going to do about our water supply? Well, we invited Stephen Katz, who's the Market Development Manager at SUEZ Water Technologies Solutions, to talk with us about water recycling, wastewater and industrial water management, and how Suez is working to increase our access to clean water. Stephen, welcome to the show. How are you today?
Very good. Thanks for having me, Mitch.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you here. Now, first, tell us a little about Suez's history. You were part of General Electric. You've been in this industry for a long time, but your name has changed. Where does Suez come from, and what is it now?
Well, Suez has been in the industry for a number of years, for a long time. Started with the building of the Suez Canal.
That long ago. Wow, I didn't realize.
But so Suez itself is a global water and waste company. Ourselves, so the business unit that I work in is a Water Technologies and Solutions business unit. And we're sort of dedicated to solving world water challenges with solutions that incorporate technologies, chemistry, and sort of outsourced water services. We work in both municipal and industrial worlds all over the globe. That business unit, the majority of it was purchased out of the General Electric, or as the General Electric water business three to 4 years ago.
Right. Okay, so let's talk about water recycling technology. Bluefield Research projects that over the next 6 years, 37% more water is going to be recycled. That's about 6.6 billion gallons a day. And when we think about water recycling, I think the most immediate idea most people have is of astronauts drinking water made from their own waste. It isn't appetizing. What is water recycling, terrestrial water recycling, mean, and where does it generally get applied?
Yeah, that's a pretty extreme case based out of need for human life, right? In a strange place. But on Earth, what we need to really ground people with, and you mentioned that right off the bat, was that water on Earth is a finite resource, and the water we have today was the same water that we had millions of years ago. So when you look at it in that perspective, really all water is recycled. So whether it's for drinking, for irrigation, for anything, it's recycled.
And it's recycled naturally too by the clouds. Rainwater is recycled water for all intents and purposes, but technology for recycling involves what?
Right. So the technology involves different barriers. So today, we have the technology to take any stream of water, whether that's a surface water, whether that's an industrial waste or used water, and take that and augment it to any quality of water. There's various types of technologies that exist within that, from settling technologies to membrane technologies that provide a barrier to oxidation technologies, which can reduce or remove certain constituents. So there's a whole spectrum of technology that exists out there. I think when you look at it, where we're replacing recycling and where recycling is happening most is around where you have a limited freshwater supply. So you see a lot of stresses that are created from demand. So population growth, we're going to add 2 billion people to the planet, I think, in the next 30 years. Scarcity, so we're seeing drought, or where you have limited groundwater or surface water supplies, and also environmentally, where you're seeing increases in pollution.
So how big a shortage does Suez project when you look across the globe and think about how much you have to grow your business in order to respond to the need for more recycled water? How many billions of gallons a day short will we be if we don't make a change?
Well, I think that the demand increase, I think it becomes a very regional watershed specific case. And I think that in certain areas, you're going to have upwards of 50% additional demand requirements. And in other areas, you might be lower than that. So I think it is a very regional topic and watershed specific topic. But you're going to see different levels of stress occurring in different areas.
Interesting. So it's a little like power generation today. We have thought about power as this centralized utility, but it's becoming a distributed problem partly because the modern economy has expanded so much. Now, you did a project in Morro Bay, California, where you're reclaiming water to augment groundwater supplies, and this is in a coastal community. What are you doing there, and what's been the result?
Yeah, so the Morro Bay case is an interesting one. Obviously, that the community is located in California's Central Coast. Mm-hmm. There, it's a two-part story, really. The community wanted to secure a sustainable fresh water supply, but also it's a resilience and infrastructure aspect. They were mm-hmm. under pressure to relocate their wastewater plant to avoid issues like seawater rise, potential tsunamis, and flooding, because they're where that wastewater plant was located. Mm-hmm. So they were going to transpose that somewhere else, but also the region, the California landscape creates many regional water supply issues, right? And also their coastal groundwater supply was limited. So what they did what they're in the process of doing is building a facility that will put SUEZ's MBR technology at the center of it, where you'll treat the wastewater to a level, very high level, along with some additional technologies downstream like reverse osmosis mm-hmm. and ultraviolet disinfection. And then they'll inject that water into the groundwater system to allow them to bring that water back. The beauty of recycled water is that the wastewater exists where the need is, right? So you have the wastewater facility located directly where that groundwater supply is. So you're able to inject it back into that groundwater to help augment those supplies and not diminish it at the same rate that you were before.
And another aspect of the local element of this is a lot of industrial programs rely on sources of water, whether it's streams or groundwater, to process whatever they make. Suez recycles that water and it gets passed back into the environment, or it can be reused. Is Suez working with clients to make them water self-sufficient so they don't always have to be drawing more water out of the environment?
Yeah, I think there's really two aspects when you look at industrial facilities and the used water that comes from them, right? There's the contaminant side of it. So if they're releasing water back into the environment, we are working with them on treatment plans to remove those constituents from the water before they go back into the environment. Mm-hmm. And on the water side, we're helping facilities with their water footprint. So if you have a facility, right, there's a competition for demand in a lot of these regions. So if a facility wanted to expand per se or build a new facility and they had X amount of water demand and the community couldn't support that water demand, there are strategies that we can use to recycle some of that water back within the facilities. They can use that water for things like cleaning, for cooling towers and cooling, boiler operations and steam generation, or different manufacturing uses. And to tell you the truth, we're seeing more and more of that recycled water going back into their processes and product streams as well.
Well, does that mean that in the long term, something like a denim factory, which is incredibly water intensive, or a cattle farm where, obviously water is put into the animals and it comes back out, could it operate on on a closed loop of 100% recycled water, or at least substantially reduce the amount of water it has to pull into the system on a daily basis?
Yeah, there you kind of got to look at the water balance a little bit to get to 100%. That really means that nothing comes in or nothing leaves. So most of the time, there's water leaving through processes like evaporation or in the products, right? So,
But you could reduce the amount of water that system was required on a daily basis, right?
No, without question, right? And this starts to become a bit of a cost consideration if you're in a water-rich part of the world with water everywhere and it's very inexpensive and available. Then you likely aren't gonna do that. But when you start to put some of these factories in areas with scarcity, for sure, you're able to recycle with some of that low-hanging fruit in the order of like 30 to 60% of the water in the facility.
Okay.
So you can really make a dent. So I think that we see a lot more in that range where you're going to use it for, like I said, the cleanings and the cooling towers, maybe go a bit further and do it in the boilers for recycling. And that can really lower the footprint, the water footprint of a facility.
Now, again, there are a lot of regions in the world where there's going to be rising demand for water, particularly around industrial applications. What regions do you all see water crises emerging in the next decade? And in particular, how much do you figure desalination contributing to the solution to local water supply challenges?
Yeah. So when you look at regions and you look at areas, I think again it's going to be around that increased demand, increased scarcity, increased pollution, right?
Mm-hmm.
And where those converge is where you're going to see it. A place like Southern California,
Okay.
where a lot of the water is imported, limited groundwater supply, very arid. They see a lot of stress there. Similar issues in some of the other Southwest states. Listen, we're seeing, land subsidence as an issue in Virginia, and there's a big project going on there where they're looking at augmenting groundwater supplies to fight land subsidence. Florida as well has its own challenges. Around the world, we've seen these emergencies occur. You mentioned Chennai, but South Africa had its day zero crisis. Brazil felt something similar, and Australia several years ago as well. So, there's places you wouldn't think about, like the UK, where there's a lot of rain, but limited capture and storage as it gets to the bottom of the island. So you're seeing some challenges exist there. So around the world, we're seeing that. Now, you asked about desal or desalination. So that we have seas with tremendous amounts of
There's
water.
A lot of water out there. Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of water. You would hit 3% fresh, right? So when it comes down to that, you're really looking at a cost, I'd say a return on your effort, and potentially a diversification, right? So if you have a very large community, there's ways to conserve or augment freshwater supplies, right? You can use less, you can import more, right? You can do recycling for non-potable purposes, so landscape, irrigation, agriculture, which is significant use for this type of water. You can recycle it for drinking water, right? And which also lowers it. And then the other one is desalination. Today, desalination tends to be on the more expensive end when you're looking at it.
And that's because it's energy intensive, isn't that the case?
Very much so, right? Okay. So you're forced to push water against membranes of a very low pore size to reject the ion. So it is very energy intensive and yeah, so but it is a tool and it is used a lot. And when you look at a diversification of a portfolio, desal definitely has a place within that.
You think that's a good solution for the Southwest, where a lot of that water is coming out of the Colorado River that doesn't even reach the ocean anymore? Is that the kind of candidate region that we're talking about?
Yeah, when you say the Southwest, you're more looking at coastal communities. So yeah, some of those large communities, I think that they should have a piece of their infrastructure as desalination. But again, there's been a lot of studies around costs and availability of wastewater, and I think that type of recycling is gonna play a greater role in the coming years in those types of communities, especially as you go inland. The beauty of wastewater is like I said before, it's where you use water to create wastewater or used water. It's exactly where you need it, right? You just need to treat it to the level, which we can, and then re-inject it, discharge it to a surface water body, or soon we're going to start having regulations about augmenting drinking water supplies with it.
Interesting. Now, the regulations, do you expect those to come from the feds or from state government or down at the municipal level?
These regulations are being developed at the state levels.
Okay.
There is that's where they're happening.
Now, we're talking a lot about demand here, and that brings up market forces. And some of the most influential investors in the world, including Michael Burry, who became famous for making the Big Short call and was featured in the movie about the banking crisis, is saying that water is the next big commodity where prices are going to soar. Should people be concerned about the price of their water going up dramatically as a result of increased demand?
Yeah, well, water is one of many things that I think people should be concerned about the price going up for. But the true cost of value of water is heavily debated, right? And the struggle here is it tends to move very quickly into the political arena because municipalities tend to be the ones that are delivering that bill.
Sure.
I did the math. I looked at this a few months ago just to have an idea, and I pay less than $3 per day for a family of 4 for water. Do I value water more than that? Without question. So, to talk about, you're asking about our price is going to go up. Well,
yeah.
Water systems are facing tremendous amounts of pressure, right? Our infrastructure is aging, right? There's scarcity that exists, and the quality that we're treating to get that water is diminishing. So all of these, they tend to point to higher costs for this. How do we deal with that? It's really around planning and taking these issues on before they get too large to handle. So to avoid, let's say, crisis levels. But do I see water costs going up? Yeah, and honestly, I personally, I think they should.
Well, how does a couple of things. So, in fact, in my community, we have a conflict between municipal government and state over water purification before it's released back into the environment in the Puget Sound. The state is making a change that the local community says will cost $1 billion, which will result in a 300% increase in water costs here. The problem that I think we all are concerned about, and Texas recently showed us this in the energy infrastructure, is that some privately owned systems can end up really gouging people. How does SUEZ work with municipal water systems to ensure that they are planning to keep water costs under control? And
right. So,
when you actually directly manage it, what kind of commitments do you have to keep those costs under control?
Yeah, listen, so SUEZ operates utilities in 6 states. We deliver drinking water to more than 2.5 million people. We also operate more than 70 water and wastewater facilities in the US and Canada. I really think that the approach is around working with the local authorities and the state officials, right, to develop an overall supply plan for that can pass the test of resilience, right? We'll work to really gather data, use digital technologies to map and understand all of these issues, and then work with, a community needs a comprehensive plan. And to develop that comprehensive plan, you really need to work with everybody. So there's a lot of local NGOs that exist, universities, regional planning authorities. And I think that the whole idea there is to get everybody together to ensure that you have a future plan and you have a path to preserve and enhance kind of that water resilience that exists in communities. You know, again, different personalities get in the room with different people, and it can create a strain. But to me, it's an exercise in planning and looking ahead. And you know, I think that the concept of rising costs in this in a political arena can be hard to stomach, but you know, they've got to be dealt with head on, because there's really no other way besides putting band-aids on these things to create us greater issues down the road.
And in fact, that's the problem that we're having here, is that we're really only addressing one issue, and that is we're trying to put a band-aid on water going into the sound. But we have this larger problem of increasing demand. What kind of time frame should we be thinking about when we do water planning today? 10 years, 20 years, 50 years?
50 is hard, but I do think that it's staged, right? I think that there needs to be actions that can be taken in the short term to start moving in the right direction. So I would call that the 1 to 5 year area, where you're not gonna you know, change the complete view of everything. It's a little bit like a cruise ship and changing direction a little bit. And then I think that you're in that 5 to 15 year period is where you can start to look at major shifts in your infrastructure. And then I think that 15 to 30 year period is really that future planning piece of it, where you're really looking at where you can go and when you can see a difference that's completely different than where you're at today, I would say.
So in the short term, this raises issues for low income and underserved communities. How does SUEZ work with nonprofits and others to try to ensure that water is available to them?
Right. So with these utilities, we're obviously investing in the utilities themselves. But you know, we do work with nonprofits, and exactly that is you know, there's obviously a rate base, and within that we make accounts for assistance with low income assistance for their bills. We also help families who might have lost a job or get called to military service, and that's been ongoing for 15 years, where we've worked with different nonprofits in different areas to allow for that, for the communities that we're supplying water to.
So when you all sit down and talk about your long-term planning, can you tell us what you imagine the world of 2030 looks like today? And in terms of your ideal, where are you aiming to take us in terms of our water supply?
Yeah, well, 2030 is soon, right? So that's not out of today's planning horizon in the terms of infrastructure. So, you know, headwinds that we're going to put a lot of pressure on us going forward is real scarcity. And I think, you know, not maybe dodging a bullet sometimes or having scarcity, but I think real human life impacting scarcity. The infrastructure, like I said, population growth and industrialization, the three of those coming together with the amount of people that we're going to add to the planet, the age of the existing infrastructure, the band-aids that we've been putting on it, I think that's going to drive costs. And then I think the other headwind that we're really going to see is keeping up with chemicals. I think that there's something like 2,000 new chemicals a year, some unknown chronic toxicities that exist. So what is that going to look like, and what's that going to shape? And maybe, you know, 9 years is too soon, but I think that, you know, we touched on this a little bit before. You might see more distributed recycling. You might see more in-home concepts that exist. And then you might not see this drain in your home be open like it was in the past, right? Where you can put anything you want in it, and it's not just your home, it's all the drains around the cities for collection. So I think that there's going to be some significant changes on that. At a high level, I think that we're seeing this, and I'm sure you're seeing this, Mitch, for sure, is that, you know, we were a society that, you know, purchased, consumed, discarded, right? So a very linear type of a model. I think that we are in the process, or we're maybe already there in some angles, is turning that into that circular type model. where what we use is then dissected for what value it can bring.
So we go back to the astronauts again, and your comment about it. It's a very fundamental self-preservation issue. The home becomes like on the energy grid, and increasingly self-contained, and potentially even contributing rather than simply consuming component.
Right, and I think that concept, with the way our infrastructure has been built up on exactly the opposite of that, will take a tremendous amount of time. But I think in some developing parts of the world, you're already there in terms of managing it at a home level, right? If you're not, that allows different qualities of water to be sort of conveyed and then dealt with at a source for their use as well. So. It's almost like flipping the whole model. So do I see it? That's not a 2030 thing, but as we move ahead,
we'll have to be on the path by then. Is that correct?
I don't see it 2030, the path there changing that drastically. And it depends, we're seeing more extreme events from a weather perspective. If this continues to move in that direction, then yeah, I think that certain areas will see that. But again, watersheds and water issues tend to be regional. I live up by the Great Lakes. We're blessed with a tremendous amount of fresh water, right? If somebody lived in Southern California, it's a different situation.
Well, Stephen, this has been a fascinating conversation and very relevant for World Water Day. I want to thank you for joining us.
No, thank you for having me. Very passionate about this topic, and I'm glad you were able to address it on your podcast. So thank you.
We'd love to have you come back and continue to talk about this, because we just uncovered a whole set of onion skin layers that we have to peel back in order to understand the change in the water infrastructure. So folks, that was Stephen Katz. He's the Market Development Manager for SUEZ Water Technologies and Solutions. You can find out more about SUEZ Water at www.suezwatertechnologies.com. That's all one long word, suezwatertechnologies.com. And urge you to check it out and start to think about your own water use as you let it run down the drain, or if you're watering your backyard. Take a moment and think about what you're doing and how you can change your consumption. This is Earth911 Sustainability in Your Ear. I'm Mitch Ratcliffe, and we're going to be back with another interview soon. But in the meantime, folks, take care of yourself, take care of one another, and let's all take care of the planet.